program has been the spate of announcements that we've received from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today. The upcoming federal budget will now include a $15 billion top-up to their apartment construction loan program. And just yesterday also announced a $6 billion infrastructure fund to support provincial development. But in order to access that cash, provinces will have to agree to a set list of rules and strings essentially attached to this. And it's received some backlash from provincial leaders.
We need to make sure the municipalities are able to build what is best in their community, because many things I've learned, but in 444 municipalities across this province, every municipality is a little different, and every municipality has different needs. But I have all the confidence in the world in the mayors and the council to put homes where they belong.
Well, joining us now, Sean Fraser, Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, who's been part of the announcements made by the federal government. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of some of the comments and the reticence by both the Premier of Ontario, but also in Quebec?
Look, my goal when we roll out these policies and develop new initiatives is to build more homes. We know that we need to help cure the supply gap, and in order to do that, we have to implement the solutions that we know exist. When I listen to the clip that you've just played, I have a lot of respect for Premier Ford, for my Ontario counterpart, but I have a different view. My perspective is that in order to solve the housing crisis, we can't allow municipalities to make it illegal for someone to build a small apartment on a piece of land that they already own where infrastructure already exists. Now, we're not forcing this upon anyone. We're putting a federal incentive on the table and saying if you want the federal cash for infrastructure, you have to make sure that you're putting in place policies that are going to ensure that we actually have sensible and cost-effective infrastructure. If you don't allow zoning practices to build homes where infrastructure already exists, it's hard for me to deliver value for Canadians by spending more infrastructure to build communities that currently have none, when we could in fact accomplish greater housing outcomes by incentivizing the kind of reforms that we announced yesterday.
And I guess that's, I mean, it was announced today, Canada Builds, but it's been a part of the work that you've been doing with the provinces as well as the municipalities, not just attached to this funding, but in general to loosen zoning restrictions, to make it easier to build. I'm wondering if you could just give us some insight into how that's going, what you view as tangible success after years of those efforts.
So I was appointed last summer and got to roll out a number of policies really beginning in September. And if I look at the Housing Accelerator Fund as one prime example of federal incentives leading to changes by other levels of government, we can point to 179 binding agreements with cities across Canada and, of course, the province of Quebec that is actually delivering real change to the way that homes are built in this country. What we've seen is virtually every big city in Canada has now adopted a 4 units as of right policy. What we've seen is zoning changes that allow for higher density near post-secondary institutions, near transit stations. What we've seen is the adoption of new digital permitting processes that's going to dramatically speed up the process of getting an approval, which is going to protect the ability of that pro forma to still hold after the approval process is complete. We need to do everything that we can, not just to pay for the construction of homes, but change the way that cities allow them to be built. When we put federal money on the table and use federal leadership, we've seen that we can influence change at other levels of government, and it's going to take all of us to solve the housing crisis, and we're happy to play our part, and we're putting incentives on the table for other levels of government to do the same.
Does the government or does this initiative contemplate a specific target of housing units? Keeping in mind the CMHC has said that we need 3.5 million housing units by 2030 to restore affordability.
Now, each initiative that we roll out has an estimate of the number of homes attached to it. We are going to be publishing a plan to solve the national housing crisis over the next few weeks, in fact, before the federal budget. And we'll have more to say about what the collective impact of the policies we're putting forward will have. Now, specific to the top up of the apartment construction loan program, that now brings the total number of homes that we expect to see directly financed by the federal government through that one program program to about 131,000. And that's before we contemplate any additional homes that will result as following the announcement of the Canada Builds program, because of course, when you put provincial resources on top of those federal resources, we have the opportunity to scale it up further. When we look at the Housing Accelerator Fund, the projections from the cities that we have binding agreements with indicate that over the next decade, they will be permitting more than 750,000 new homes. So each of the initiatives we roll out has a specific target in mind, and we measure the target against the real world success. And in the case of the Housing Accelerator Fund, actually release the funding to municipalities when they deliver on the results. So we're going to continue to monitor program by program what the success rate is. But to answer your question, yes, we do have targets, not just collectively, but tied to each of the specific initiatives.
Any hints on what you might be announcing in the next couple of weeks? Are they brand new initiatives, expansions of existing facilities or programs?
It will be a mix of different things, but you should expect to see our plan to address the housing crisis to do three main things. One is to build more homes with a view to curing the supply gap. The second is ensuring that we advance the interest of the most vulnerable in Canada. And the third is to make it easier to rent or to buy a home in this country. We're going to advance a suite of policies, some of which may scale up existing initiatives, some of which will involve brand new policies that will be rolled out over the next few weeks, culminating with the publication of a plan in advance of the federal budget.
Housing is not a problem in a vacuum. There are a number of constraints, and as we look towards the federal budget, this is one in which many economists have called for the government not to exacerbate the inflationary situation that the country finds itself in. How much of a constraint is that on your ability to spend even more on tackling the housing deficit that we have in the country?
So you're absolutely right to point to the fact that we don't want to work against ourselves by triggering increases in the rate of interest at the Bank of Canada or higher rates of inflation as we seek to unlock housing supply. As the governor of the Bank of Canada pointed out, housing is actually one of those areas where we have federal programs that support more supply. You actually can see a disinflationary impact as the supply comes closer to the level of demand that you see in the market. However, there are calls from different stakeholder organizations that would like us to put programs that purely speak to the demand side of the equation. For example, those which are designed specifically to help someone buy an existing home rather than build a new one. We're very mindful of that dynamic between supply and demand and want to avoid ginning up demand at the same time we advance measures that could involve public spending to address the supply gap that we're trying to cure. So as we move forward, you should expect to see disproportionately our programs are going to target the supply, but we do want to ensure that we're demonstrating real awareness and understanding of the generational fairness issue. And we think we can hit the right balance by focusing primarily on supply and advancing some measures that will make it easier to rent or buy a home, not all of which come necessarily with great public expenditures, but those that involve significant public spending will disproportionately impact the supply side of the equation.
Has immigration made this situation worse, and is there a complementary plan on the immigration side to pull that back as we work to get our housing affordability and just housing off the ground in a more meaningful way?
Population growth is one of many factors that impacts housing markets. There's no question. And of course, given my previous role as immigration minister, it's a file I know intimately. When it comes to our permanent residency numbers, we need to continue to sustain healthy population growth by attracting skilled professionals into the economy and into the country. And I'd point out about 100% of our labor force growth currently comes from immigration. A lot of our healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, come from other countries, and we can't abandon that strategy. However, we do have real challenges when it comes to some of our temporary programs. We've seen certain employers and certain institutions like colleges and university have gone too far in terms of the number of study permits or work permits they've requested without putting in place proper supports to ensure people have housing, for example. Some of the decisions that Minister Miller has advanced that have been in the works for a number of months are going to significantly help on the temporary side of the equation. Look at some of the measures with respect to international students. We're going to be developing a trusted partner model, and in the intervening period, have a cap on the overall number divided amongst provinces, so we avoid the scenario where a single institution is going to be able to exacerbate the housing crisis by bringing thousands or potentially tens of thousands of people into one community without providing housing for them. Similarly, some of the reforms that he's implemented on the temporary foreign workers program will shrink the percentage of a company's workforce that can rely on that particular program. And of course, for some of the other programs we have, particularly in agriculture or fish processing, there are housing requirements that will be maintained. So absolutely, it's something that we're advancing as part of the holistic approach to addressing the housing crisis, but we can't lose who we are in the mix. Canada is a country whose economy was built on immigration. If you are not from an Indigenous community in this country, your family came from somewhere else. We want to maximize the benefits of long-term permanent residency applications of people who want to come and contribute to Canada, but we want to avoid some of the abuses that we've seen take place when it comes to certain institutions that have gone too far when it comes to welcoming a number of people that communities can actually handle.
You're doing a lot to incentivize builders to build, reducing fees, trying to cut the amount of time it takes to get approval. I'm curious how much high interest rates are acting against you, or whether you think you can devise policies that help get around the fact that high interest rates are one of the reasons that builders aren't building.
High interest rates certainly have an impact. Anybody who tells you different should speak to folks in the sector. This is one of the top concerns that I hear. Now, of course, on the demand side, it also has the impact of encouraging some people to rethink whether it's the right time to buy, which can put downward pressures on prices. So at the same time that we want to maintain low costs, we do want to incentivize building. That's where a program like the apartment construction loan program that we've expanded today comes into play. This is one that passes on the federal rate of borrowing to builders in exchange for commitments they make around affordability. A certain proportion of the units in a project actually have to be offered at a price that's based on the median income level of people in that housing market. So we can extract commitments around affordability to help keep costs low while we pass on that lower rate of interest to incentivize building. But there's more we need to do. Look at the waiver of the GST on purpose-built rentals in this country. We've heard of thousands of units within days of that announcement that were going to go forward that otherwise would have remained on the shelf. We've topped up the Canada Mortgage Bond Program with billions of dollars in securitization that's actually going to put more low-cost financing into the market. We also need to make it easier to build different kinds of homes, like small multiplexes where infrastructure already exists, and bigger apartment buildings near post-secondary institutions, and transit, among other things, if we're going to solve this crisis. There's a slew of factors that we need to consider, but working against high interest rates is something that we need to do by making sure that the math works for builders as part of that strategy to help build more homes.